Yes, good afternoon, everybody. So we are really happy to have a talk today being presented by one of our candidates for the core faculty search. And this is Adrián Villaseñor Galarza. Am I right, Adrián? And he will give us a presentation. So it's all yours, Adrián.
Hi, Devashis. Thank you, everyone. It's good to see familiar faces again. So let's get going. I was a little ambitious. We have a lot of ground to cover, but I'm not going to stress out. And I'm going to invite you to settle together, just like a minute or so, to settle together in one moment. But just for you hear my voice, my name is Adrián, like Devashis was saying. I'm in the traditional lands of the Yakuts and Mono peoples, not too far from the Bay Area. I'm originally from Mexico, and I am a CIS alum from back 2013. So we'll get to know each other a little more. So I want to invite you now to open the space together to, if it feels comfortable for you, to close your eyes or keep them halfway open. And as we do that, allow for maybe your breath to kind of like find a deeper ground, find our breath print. As we do that, we kind of like drop the anchor of our awareness to the body or to the heart space, or become aware of the area of connection with the living earth underneath you, underneath your feet, supporting you from beneath and actually from all around. And I want to invite you now with your mind side to imagine a threshold in front of you, in front of all of us. And as you gently move in that direction, you start feeling kind of like a sense of both longing and belonging to the other side of that threshold, that portal. Yeah, and we move together, we cross that threshold and we enter into this more kind of homey, roomy space filled with many allies and friends of this earth community, but also it is that from that place that you can connect to your own allies and friends. And I just want to take a moment before we shift to ask that from you, to invite your people and your friends and your spiritual team, so to speak, to join you. Say hi. And to rest for the next hour in their presence, in their company, and in their nurturance. Great. Just one more second like that. And lastly, please make yourself aware of the living shrine in the middle of your body, the heart space, and go there for a moment to take refuge. To allow yourself to rest there for a moment. And as you do that, come back gently to your physical body, to the awareness of it, to the awareness of your own physical heart space. And gently at your own pace, no rush. Open your eyes. Thank you. All right. Let's do this. Okay. Here we go. All right. Can someone signal me if you can see my screen? Is that yes? Thank you. Okay. All right. So what brought us together is this: birthing Earth within, the transformative potentials of our planetary moment. And I often like to start presentations with a poem or with an invitation of sorts. And I have two fragments here for you. The first one, the letters that you see in the brackets is Nahuatl. And the heart governs everything. And it's one of the codices we have for the Nahua peoples, Mexica peoples. And this fragment of Goethe's Holy Longing. And so long as you haven't experienced this, to die and so to grow, you are only a travel guest on the dark earth. So I have a map for you for our time together. It has 5 moments. There we go. And I have to apologize as I had an issue with the key diagram that I had prepared for you, the integration of the spiral and Grof's perinatal matrices. So I had to improvise this morning. So you'll see what I mean, but I think we can understand each other as it is. So, and I also want to invite you to, there's a lot of information in the slides. I'm not going to probably touch on everything. Probably I'm going to skim through some things and highlight other things, but it's just there in case, you know, when it comes to time to ask questions and concerns, you can address those if you want. So first moment, planetary moment. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this, but this is creating the context, the great kind of narrative or story that our lives unfold. And well, it's disconcerting, it's overwhelming. It's we have the 6th mass extinction there, we have the climate crisis, the end of cheap oil, the social injustices, on your top left, the 9 planetary boundaries that we've crossed, 4 of those, the pandemic, sort of this great acceleration of some authors refer to this planetary time that is certainly unprecedented as far as we know, you know, in terms of the geological record, the historical record. This is kind of like uncharted territory for the Earth system and for the human family too. So this is kind of like the background, and we'll kind of zoom in slowly. So I call this and others eco-crisis of civilization. And by this, I mean that on the one hand, we're inaugurating, and the we is the primarily the industrialized human, a new geological era. So the way I like to approach this is that what's happening now, it's big news, because on the one hand, it's going to have effects in the long run. And also, this, what we're living through hasn't happened in at least 65 million years. So neological era that it's baptized as the Anthropocene, or the age of the human. And you can see maybe the problem, or one of the big problems right there, that we'll discuss later. So great interconnection, informationally speaking, technologically speaking, huge developments in science and progress, socially speaking. And at the same time, big light and big shadow. Great unraveling, great unrest, great destruction. So it seems that this polarity, we're gonna explore this in different ways, at different scales of organization, but it seems to be living even at the level of the planet itself. And just to touch this here for a moment, we'll go more in depth in the second phase of the presentation, but the soulscapes, or what's happening then in the personal level of things and the human level, right? Crisis of meaning, spiritual crisis, crisis of perception. It has many names, but certainly a lot of turmoil, a lot of suffering, a lot of confusion, and things don't seem to be going all that well in terms of health and wellness and viability of our psyches, and just a complete overwhelm of our nervous systems with what's happening all around us. So a fertile way that we can start seeing this is by, well, it's kind of like very pessimistic, what you're suggesting, this big transition, unprecedented chapter in the earth and the human family. And some people refer to this as kind of like, well, is the end time? Is the apocalypse finally came? Well, I guess in a sense, I certainly hope so, because that means that it's the time of unveiling, of shedding light to what was previously hidden, what was lying in the dark, or what was repressed. It's finally, at least gradually, coming out of the open. And on the left-hand side, you'll see many cycles that are coming to their end that I touched on the first slide on some of those. But really, I asked that question, like, should we thank life, or God, Goddess, the Great Spirit, for this time, for being alive in this time? And this is a question that I want to keep alive as we explore this presentation together. Is it good news? Is it good news, bad news? Does it matter? What does it mean for my own development and the well-being and viability of my family and my community? Yeah. So kind of like trying to shift that perspective here. There's a suggestion of 4 ways that we can do that, right? And we're going to focus on the third one primarily. But you see, this big transitional phase that we're undergoing as a human family can be explained in a, I guess, life-affirming way through these 4 stories. And we're actually starting to grow up from that patho-adolescent way of being. Or there's a higher degree of interconnectedness at a deep level, like the global brain story suggests. And my favorite is that the planet itself, or herself, is giving birth. It is this time that the Earth herself is finally giving birth, so to speak. You'll see what I mean later on. And the last story is that the sacred feminine, a relational, heart-based, compassionate way of being, is coming back after thousands of years of going underwater. So we are kind of at a crossroads, and it's exemplified by a good number of things. One of them would be a prophecy. A couple of prophecies I put there: the Shambhala prophecy from Tibet, and the prophecy of the condor and the eagle of the Americas. So it said that finally at this time, the eagle of the north and the condor of the south will fly together because they need each other. And there's a development there that the hummingbird of the center, so the 3 Americas, need to fly together. The time is now, after 500 years of just genocide, oppression. So it's that is a core suggestion that I'll keep reminding you, that it's maybe an auspicious moment to be alive. Jung would say that it's time of the mutation of the gods and goddesses, a time for transformation, a time of great uncertainty, a time of unraveling. And in the Hindu tradition, we have the notion of the yugas as like the suns for the Aztecs, or the Pachacutics for the Incas. You know, so in the Kali Yuga, I like to highlight that because it says that the teachings in and of the Kali Yuga are like super. It is only enough to chant the name of God to realize oneself. It is said in the Kali Yuga, whereas in the other yugas or periods of time, you need to do a little bit more work, right? So it seems that in this time, there's fertile possibilities of transformation. So I have this guiding question. We hear a lot about the shift in consciousness that is required to address the challenges of our time. Well, what does that mean? How do we go about it? And my suggestion is that that shift in consciousness looks or is guided by the image of giving birth in human form. How do we go about that? I'll propose that in a moment. But we have an initial suggestion there from Thich Nhat Hanh that we use a lot in the work that reconnects. The most important thing we need to do at this time is to hear within us the cries of the earth. What does that even mean? So this is what we're going to go about primarily in this presentation. All right. Roots of confusion. So before we go there, we need to address a couple of things here. So what is it that is the things, one of the key drivers of this catastrophe that is happening? So I have three here classics, Paul Shepard, James Hillman, and Joanna Macy, that speak about this, like the core of it from a psychospiritual perspective or eco-psycho-spiritual perspective. It's who we are, basically. So we can say that we're maybe confused in terms of our role and function in the global ecosystem. And so the last one from Macy, I want to highlight there because it's so these previous generations from ours, even my mom and dad still believe that there was this innate continuity of the life-giving circumstances that provided for their kids. They didn't question that. And this is a very recent kind of development that we're starting to question what's that about, whether there's going to be running water or healthy soil to plant our food, or oceans that are not littered with microplastics or whatever, like it's really something that at the psychological level, emotional level, it's really taxing, and it is also unprecedented. So here's my suggestion. I don't know if it's kind of like a mouthful of a term, ecoanasognosia, but let me explain it for a second. Because this question, especially the Paul Shepard one, why do our societies keep destroying their home, has really led me to the rabbit hole for me personally. And this is my best effort to kind of like try to make sense of that. And I gave it the name ecoanasognosia. Anasognosia is a clinical term from psychiatry that it's often in popular culture associated with the phantom limb syndrome. Have you heard of that? It's like people that actually don't have, their arms, for example, were amputated, and they still actually see it in the mirror, and they can move it, and they actually feel that it's there. So it's a kind of associated with brain damage, physiologically speaking, but that's kind of like one theory. But the psychological dynamics of that, perceptual implications of that are very important here. Because for me, the reason why we keep destroying ourselves and the earth is because we're so confused that we take our confusion for reality. So that would be, for example, Patanjali's definition of ignorance. But so Aurobindo would call this the wheel of separative consciousness. And so we don't only ignore, but we ignore that we ignore. So it's a deep shadow in the Jungian sense that we don't know that it's even there. But that's kind of the basis of our identity. So this is what I refer to as eco-anasognosia, industrial mind's deep-seated and pervasive forgetfulness that results from normalizing the collective denial of the ecological crisis. That's the norm. To be at odds and wage war against the rest of nature. And that's provided us with a sense of identity and security and belonging, which it's confused, in my understanding. So out of that confusion, this is kind of like basic, I guess, yoga, Buddhist psychology here. Out of that confusion arises a sense of self, right? And one of my teachers, mentors, Joe, defines it in that way, which I think it just hits the nail in the head. The malignant view that we're all isolated alien beings at odds with others, a delusion in a hostile world, a delusion based on identifying and refining our worst case memories and instinctive stress reactions as me, myself, and I. So someone like David Abram would suggest that we're kind of like in this echo chamber that we can only hear and pay attention to our own creations. And we're kind of like in this prison, anthropocentric prison. And I put there just like three notions or concepts from psychological literature to kind of address the same idea of how, I guess, pathological it is the industrial sense of self. So here's a diagram that I created a few years back that exemplifies this conundrum. I try to put it simple here, but we'll see. So it's something that I call industrial operating system. And on the sides of the diagram, you have what is called some like seed ideas, you know, of the industrial system that keep our sense of identity in place. And these feed on the notion of trauma, eco-trauma, which that would be kind of like our disconnection from the earth matrix. So these in turn create this sense of complete dissonance and delusion that we could call ecopsychosis that ends up nurturing our diluted sense of who we are. And just to note here that this operating system, it's kind of like, I don't like to use machine metaphors very much, but this is kind of like a software of a cultural meme, so to speak. It's not necessarily some tangible physical structure. It is manifested in institutions and structures, but it goes beyond that, right? So on the left, you'll see some of the pathologies of the industrial mind, and with the prefix eco, which is kind of like okay, here we go again. But as I agree with the authors here, that it's necessary because oikos, home, to highlight that. As long as we don't come to terms with the fact that we are also in direct continuity and communion with the eco, we would probably need to keep emphasizing that. So on the right side, I that's one way that I also kind of try and envision how this loops of destruction are kept in place, you know, and feed on themselves. A runaway feedback loop right here. That it's at its core, it's our disconnection from the earth, distorted sense of self that brings about a lot of what I referred to in that diagram, dark emotions, which are exemplified in the list on the left. And you'll see there how that cycle just touches on the many layers of organization, not only personal, but familial, cultural, political, and how they just like have create their own logic, biophobic logic, or logic against life. So kind of like to sum up here, this second moment of the presentation, I want to introduce you to this notion. Again, it's in Nahuatl, and it's spelled Yolopoliuki. And please, just if you can remember the notion, that would be great. And it's often translated as the person that has lost their heart. And so you see, we're gonna emphasize a little bit the function and role of the heart here, because I'll explain later. But as you initially, like, there's a universal intuition that the heart has to do with many things. And some of those is like the seed of who we truly are. And for these people, for the ancestral mind, exemplified in the Mexica peoples, Yolotl meant heart. So the one that had lost their heart or lost touch with their heart, they were mad, they were diseased, they needed help. Those were the ones that created trouble in the community. So my suggestion here is that there's a chronic loss of heart, and we're all causing trouble. We're kind of deluded, and so we need help. We actually in dire need of help. And I'll tell you more as we further advance kind of their suggestion, like how would they go about healing the lost heart? That's kind of where we're going. So 3. Spiral of transformation. And here we reach kind of like the core of my invitation today. So there is deep impulse, as I was suggesting initially, of what I refer to as befriending the holy compost. And that means just getting back in touch with our nature. But you see, I want to highlight here one salient feature of that nature, that it's exemplified in the figure on the right, and that's Coatlicue. Coatlicue, it's translated as she of the serpent skirt, and it's also an earth goddess. So, but that's kind of like the Bibar aspect of Tonantzin, which is the more life-giving goddess of the Mexica tradition, right? And here we go to the core idea, which is, of course, not new for most of you or all of you. But if we put one and one together, is the earth herself seems to be inviting this process. And this may be something interestingly curious for you to consider. The deep impulses of the psyche, exemplified by the longings of the living earth within, are inviting this process. This is what I'm suggesting here. That this is a lot of what makes us human and helps us reach who we are. But the interesting thing here is not only the process of a transformation as a death-rebirth thing, and but the main force or context or enabler of that is the earth herself. And that I find really interesting. All right, so my concrete proposal here stems from the work that I've been doing in the lineage of Joanna Macy and the work that reconnects, and especially this deep structure of transformation that we call the spiral of the work that reconnects. And it has 4 phases. or 4 moments, starting normally with gratitude, proceeding from gratitude, we call it. We go then into honoring the pain for the world. And for those of you that are not familiar with that notion, is again, an unprecedented pain that is occurring in our species and the rest of species about the uncertainty and the viability of future generations of all species. It's for those of you that are familiar with Eastern notions, it would be kind of like a planetary dukkha, suffering of global proportions. So of course we go like, oh, this is too much. That's kind of like primary coping mechanism. No, that's too. So we try to honor that on the second phase. And as we do that, we enter in this kind of like dark night of the soul process. And if that's done well, then the sun comes, and then we can see with new/ancient eyes. And what happens in the work that reconnects is that we acquire a more expansive sense of identity. And our care and concern flows naturally from that expanded sense. But it's not only there that the spiral ends, but the next and final phase is that of integration. That of like, then, so that's great that you've experienced that. So how are we gonna go about and live our lives with that realization, honoring that realization? So that's kind of like the backbone of what I see as the backbone of Joanna Macy's proposal of transformation, the spiral and its 4 phases. And she's a dear teacher. She just turned 93. She just recovered from COVID, and she's strong. So I'm glad. I just got the news this morning that she's doing great health-wise. So yeah, and on the other hand, Stan, right? I don't think I have to say a lot from him, but a co-founder of transpersonal psychology, pioneer psychedelic researcher and psychotherapist, many contributions. And one of them, I'm going to focus on just one of them, which is highlighted there in the 4 basic perinatal matrices. It's kind of its own take on perinatal psychology, and one of the dimensions of the new cartography of the psyche: perinatal, biographical, transpersonal, right? And but it exemplifies so beautifully the process that I'm suggesting that the earth herself is conjuring from all of us. Because you see the fetus on the first image, it's an aquatic being. And how radical of a transformation that it, at the end, in the final basic perinatal matrices, the number 4, it's now using its own lungs and is breathing oxygen for the first time. And I can attest now that having undergone that and having participated in one of those, at least, that it's really a profound experience. So so here we go. To exemplify what I'm trying to suggest here is that in 2017, coincidentally, the first 10-day immersion that I facilitated, this was in Mexico, the first one. I call it Midwives of the Great Turning. So Great Turning, it's Joanna Macy's term for the great adventure of our time, transitioning from, you know, this continuity and parasitic ways of being to life-affirming societies. So I found the flyer, which was great. I thought I was not going to find it. Yeah, we've been doing that for the last handful of years. just skipped 1 year because of the Great Reset, but we were fortunate enough to do one last year. And pioneering in Latin America is the first time they've happened. Joanna she stopped doing those. The last time I was on her team in one of these many years back, I invited her to come to Mexico, and she was like, "No, you do it." So I did it. And on the left-hand column there, it's a number of key practices that we go about in these encounters. 10-day kind of like retreat-like setting, close to wild nature, and of course organized by way of the spiral. And the profound, so you'll see that we'll have 2.5 days of honoring our pain for the world, and a day and a half of gratitude and introduction to the work. And so it just gets really amplified and very experiential, very transformative, it seems, for a lot of people. So yeah, we've done those in 3 countries in Latin America. We're hoping to this year come back to at least 2 of those, and next year maybe add 1 more, Argentina. But these are some of the things that people are saying about the experience, and basically it seems that it's a before and after for many participants. It's and people that are not even familiar with ecopsychology or eco-spirituality or anything of that. It just comes sometimes. We had, I don't know, a few years back, a whole family. I've had people with suicidal tendencies come. Had people with yeah, just different issues, different things that they're working on, and it's worked great for them. So we've done some research, as you'll see here, not a lot, but we're getting there. And I'm going to present in the next slide the results of the one from Chile. So in that one, we did semi-structured interviews, and the one in Brazil back in 2019, we applied those 2 scales that we're still processing. And in the forthcoming one in Mexico in the summer, we'll do kind of like a mixed approach. Because in spite of, you know, all the testimonials and sort of the background and baggage of the work that Reconnects, that it's been out and about in the world for 42 years officially, 43 years now, but it hasn't been as much present in the so-called global south. And so it was also a challenge to how to adapt it, where it worked. I didn't want it to be like a copy-paste kind of colonizing way of going about things and awakening to who you are by way of, you know, this thing that was created up in the north. And I think we've been successful to kind of create a more authentic approach to this work. And sometimes I question whether we should call it the same, but I think we should. So basically the interviews shed light into what we would expect, basically, you know, heightened awareness of psycho-emotional processes, connection to larger realities and frames of reference, heightened capacity to kind of self-regulation and emotional kind of viability, especially also work is to rest on our deeper identity, and that's experienced oftentimes primarily through the 2nd and 3rd phases of this spiral, which means honoring our pain, grief work, but also rituals with the ancestors and direct connection with nature. They're in the middle of the 10-day decide. There's a kind of like a, yeah, for a lack of a better word, medicine walk. And that also brings about really particular good experiences for people. And the third one kind of points at this integration that I'm suggesting here, or at least this dialogue, that this at encounter with the other than human nature kind of almost by definition entails a going beyond the personal. It's a transpersonal event. And trans in the sense of a more horizontal way, not only going depth or immanent or transcendent, but also relational. So like the three domains are kind of interplaying in that capacity in our immersions there. And also the last bit that I want to highlight here, it's the people really relish on partaking in the community interventions and the rituals associated with that. It's one of the main sources of the medicine of these events. Jonathan, can you let me know how we're doing with time, because my
exactly at 40 minutes right now.
phone kind of. This was the slide that I was apologizing because I had such a neat diagram and with many things that are there kind of crafted, and that's kind of like a shame. I apologize, but nonetheless, that's what we got. And so maybe some of you are familiar with the diagram in the background. That's kind of one of the latest versions coming from Grof in its expanded cartography of the psyche, right? And so both the spiral, the circle, the square in the center, that's a very crude representation of my proposal here. Granted, it's the first time that I speak of it out loud with others like in this explicit way, and I'm not aware of anybody else kind of working this angle. So, okay, hopefully it's a good thing. And so the 4 basic perinatal matrices somewhat correlate to the 4 moments of this spiral of the work that reconnects. And we could go on and on about this, but we're not because of the time. And hopefully we can talk so much more about this in our question and answer time. All right. So the beauty of this one, the last thing I want to say is that it didn't come about in my mind and heart like, oh, I'm going to do this and integrate these things. It actually came about by doing the immersions. And the immersion is kind of like the cherry in the cake of many other offerings, shorter in length and courses, but that's kind of like the official offering, community offering there. And it just dawned on me gradually that this is what was happening. And I often explain to people now that what we're doing is trying to birth Earth in human form. That's what we're aiming to do in that work. And this is a beautiful way, at least in my mind, of trying to make sense of the process. Since we're short on time, what I'm suggesting here, it's kind of sort of conversion in a psychospiritual sense, like no less than a conversion in a deep sense is required to better face and navigate the challenges that we have ahead and the ones that we're dealing now. So the Greek suggests beautifully that metanoia, going beyond the mind. Grof would say it's a movement toward wholeness or a holotropic kind of impulse. Ecopsychologists would suggest that we finally are more in tune with the voices of the earth And remember the initial suggestion of Thich Nhat Hanh that we hear the earth cries within. So finally, kind of, we become more porous, more permeable, more invisible to the other than human. And this on the left will become clear in 1 second. I think I'm going to pass by this one. 2 more things. I have another section that we won't have time to get into, but maybe in the Q&A. But I've seen, 4 dimensions of this process, of this birthing Earth at the human level. We come about relating to Earth as home, as healer, as teacher, and as self. This primary kind of fourfold typology, or just, sort of medicine wheel, or whatever you want to call it, is keeps the Earth within in place, so to speak, keeps that realization alive and informing our daily lives. If we conceive of the Earth as having primary those dimensions. And I'm going to finish with this one or the next one, if I have time, because here I'm kind of coming back to the earth. I'm playing of words there, and this is a beautiful way, because the heart for the Mexica, in the Mexica worldview, we had the obligation or responsibility to become craftsmen and artists that related to the heart in a way to invoke the God within. So God, Goddess, the Great Spirit dwelled in the heart. And so you remember Yolopolyuki, we lost the heart. And their remedy for that, it was sweet words and caresses. Sweet, like literally, sweet words and caresses. So I take that to be a kind of a compassionate attitude toward ourselves and other. So as we connect with the heart, I'm going to skip this one just so you see different ways of going about the heart and how it has a, I'm going to go with this one, and then if we have more time, if not, we'll finish with this one. So I would love for you to remember these 3 things. The first one, in spite of it all, it's an auspicious time to be alive. That sets in motion already the first phase of the spiral of transformation, gratitude, right there. Auspicious time to be alive. The second takeaway, urgent shift in consciousness that we often talk about. How we go about that? We need to birth Earth in human form. And how do we go about that? Well, I have a suggestion. We follow the integration of the spiral and the life-giving matrices at the time of human birth. And lastly, the human heart is entheogenic and ecodelic. So let me explain that for 30 seconds, which would mean generating the God within or divinity within, and theogenic, right? And ecodelic, manifesting Earth, manifesting home. So the human heart, in other way go about that, has a secret alliance with the Earth. And so this process of birthing Earth in human form mobilizes the energies around the heart that sort of like oversee the transmutation needed and required for us to grow up and more fully embody the Earth in our hearts and in who we are. So many things there, but probably I'm out of time. Am I? Jonathan?
Definitely.
Yes.
I mean, maybe Debashish, you can confirm that, but as of our 45 minutes, we're a little over that.
I'd say yes, Adrián. I think, yeah, I think you could wrap up with this and open it up to discussions.
Great, thanks. Hopefully, this gave you some food for thought, and I'm really curious to hear your thoughts, concerns, questions, especially the uncomfortable ones are very much welcome.
Adrián, can you please stop sharing your screen and we can see everybody in the gallery view, the question and answer period. Yeah, perfect.
Kevin?
Thank you, everyone. A very interesting presentation. Thank you. I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more about what you mean by birthing Earth in human form.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. So basically, what I'm trying to point at with that suggestion is really that another way to go about it is that the Earth herself represents our true nature. It is the chief source of who we are. Our spiritual orientation and way to go about in life is mediated by her matrix, by her. So in a very concrete way, not only on a physical level and emotional, psychological level, but even at the very core level of who we are is the Earth herself. So it's basically my invitation to go about in the process, in a transformative journey, but with some really concrete implications that I was trying to highlight. For example, it would be a spirituality, an embodied spirituality. It would be an engaged spirituality. It would be a life-affirming spirituality. So, and it's of course not a one-time process, but it's really an ongoing shifts in consciousness that will render us closer to that dimension. Does that make sense?
Thank you very much.
Sarah, you have your hand up?
Yeah, wow, it was so interesting. Thank you so much for this. I have a comment that I'd like to share about the Yolopuligui, about the person who has lost their heart. And it just feels like for me, it really has been the case. And the way that you put it, it feels like a disconnection from my heart. I never really connected with my heart. I actually feel like a lot of, I don't know if it's shame or like a sense of dirtiness that I stay away from this area. So when you said that, it feels like I live in the dark night of the soul. So it just really kind of touched from many different angles, and it set into perspective a lot of things. And yeah, thank you so much for that. And I have a question about the mother and devourer. I didn't really quite get that, but it really stood out to me.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I'm glad that you're resonating with the heart connection. Yeah, so that what I was trying to suggest there now with a little bit more calm was that the Earth matrix as the key creative principle in life, at least in this context, has this other side. Has this other side of that invite us to the compost process, that invite us to let go, to surrender, to fine-tune, to correct course. And that sort of apparent duality, it's at the core of the invitation for transformation that is required to bring about a more life-friendly version of who we are. So what I was trying to highlight there is that the Earth herself is not only the creator, but is the destroyer. And it is, if we enter this polarity and this dance, sooner or later, with her guidance, we'll create little earths in human form.
Thank you.
I guess I want to follow up on my question, Adrián. And maybe this is too long of a conversation to have here, but it's birthing Earth in human form. I guess is that a move of consciousness, of deepening consciousness in terms of humans' understanding of who they are? Because on one level, we already are an aspect of the Earth being manifest. So is that about consciousness? Is that about heartfulness? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. So in one way, I guess it's kind of like a Zen koan, where the invitation, it's aimed at realizing that we're already that, right? So there's that level, but there's another level that there's definitely a lot of things that need to go into that composting process. And so kind of, if we're able, at least in my mind, to maintain that view that no matter how dumb we appear to be, there's this deep layer that again, no matter what we do, we're already that. So it's helpful maybe here to bring it more back to earth by way of the 3 dimensions of the great turning, for example. One of them is a shift in consciousness that we're kind of highlighting in this presentation. But we say that they go hand in hand with the other 2 dimensions, which is holding actions, or setting boundaries, or saying no to what threatens and destroys the earth and the human family. And the other dimension is saying yes and know when to say yes, and is creating alternative structures, life-affirming structures and ways of being. So the 3 form like a beautiful life-affirming system there. Mm-hmm.
Okay, ask a question.
Yeah, hi Adrián. Thank you for your presentation. So many different interesting, enlivening angles in there. So here's a question. I'm trying to be short with it. As these transformative processes are, so obviously necessary in humanity and human consciousness and the healing processes, I'd like to hear your thoughts on doing the work on the level of disconnection and disenfranchisement from Earth, as in your work and Joanna Macy's work. And then, so my question is, do you see some sort of progression that is necessary being able to do that work, from the personal, maybe to the cultural, to the interspecies and planetary sort of shifts in consciousness? Do you see dangers of bypassing or just inability also? If you think about how many people are, stuck in denial, or, all the eco ailments that you listed, that aren't able to feel all the feelings and come to a sort of an opening kind of realization. Could it be that there is a level in which, that on a personal level, there's more things to work through, to have a sense of safety, to have a sense of being resourced enough to feel, all that much strong material, and then cultural levels that play in there as well. What are your thoughts on sort of a necessary steps or interdependence of these different levels? I'd be curious to hear what you're thinking.
Thanks, Helge. Yeah, that's a great question and a complex one in my mind, because immediately conjured sort of like, for example, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I know Craig has one of eco needs, and where to start. And so how to go about this opening to the living earth, and with the terrors and beauty, amazing gifts that are there. So I often, my to go is kind of like sort of like a Buddhist take of start where we are, and bet on the skillful means to cultivate the skillful means necessary to start this journey. And so what I mean by this journey is hopefully moving in the direction of the other than human, because we're so wrapped around our own projections and thoughts and things, and often with good reason, because we're stuck in a sense of an emotive survival, for example, and our basic needs are not met. And so one of the antidotes for that I've experienced in actually sharing the work is, well, to make it as accessible as possible, and to make it as neutral as possible, like that I can explain this to my mom and my neighbor. And so it's a curriculum, I say, that this progression, so to speak, it's kind of an approach for everybody. And it's not only for the green people, it's not only for the tier, I don't know. It's actually, it's much more complex and messy and embedded than that. But certainly the logic of the spiral in both the BPMs and the spiral of the work that reconnects, if we pay attention there, it gives us a concrete hint. And it's what you suggest, like resource wherever the person is at, because these eco emotions are big, and who's going to want to take care of those? We first need to prepare the terrain to kind of then start peaking in that direction. And so what I often do is to really instill in participants and in my own view, the earth as home, earth as sense of belonging, earth as the containment vessel per excellence, that is right there, that she or her or it never left. She never left. Like that in itself, we can spend a lot of time nurturing that sense, and then rooted in that realization a little bit more. Then the other layers to open up tend to be, I guess, flow more easily. But let me just say one more thing. When we do grief work, it's an amazingly transformative event for a lot of people. Something that I call deprivatize our pain. It would be another way to approach that. And the power of community and witnessing and being with each other, I would highlight that a lot. Like really, that's also where a lot of this sense of clarity and resourcefulness comes from. I don't know if I'm extending a lot in my answer here, but that's part of it.
Thank you.
Chagua.
Adrián, buenas tardes.
Buenas.
Gracias for, thank you for your presentation. It's very interesting. I just have a couple comments, questions, and my personal view. So when you bring the Mesoamerican tradition, specifically the Aztecs or the Mexicas, as you call them, you use the Nahuatl language. And my question to you is, when we use the Nahuatl language, are you bringing the knowledge of the indigenous peoples of the world, or you are just focusing on the industrialized connection with the world? Because when we actually seeing this, the economy, the indigenous, the indigenous people of the world, they still connected and respected nature as something that without it we are not going to survive. Humanity is not going to survive. So I noticed that a little bit of one point perspective, in my opinion, from the industrial world, even though that you use the Nahuatl language to express your project. The other point of view that I saw is that most of the things that you are presenting comes from I don't like to use this Western culture, but mostly from one point view again. An example I'm gonna share is what is happening with the Amazon in Brazil, because you mentioned you did this work in Brazil, and you did the work in Chile, and you did the work in Mexico. And if we go to Brazil, we have the natives of the Amazons fighting the farmers to stop the destruction of the Amazon jungle. So again, I'm just pointing out that Joanna Macy's work is phenomenal. And then she mentioned is the work to reconnect. And one of the main shots of her video is the garbage in an island where you can see the garbage of humanity, of human beings polluting nature. And then that is what I was trying to see. I was trying to understand where are you coming from. I couldn't understand that part. Nevertheless, you brought out a very important point. If we are going to focus on one point of view, and this is the Western, more civilized, more destructive aspects of human existence. The other point that is very interesting is you mentioned the we a lot. Who's we? How you are framing the we? Because I couldn't hear non-indigenous people. No, I couldn't hear indigenous people's knowledge that you are sharing in relationship with Mother Earth, or the Earth. I call it Mother Earth, so I'm gonna say that. Yeah, it was very interesting. All the terminology that you were using is very Western, and you combine it with the Nahuatl, and very powerful. I enjoyed the Nahuatl language, and then you also brought the traditions for India, and as Buddha will say, the four noble truths of suffering and recognizing our own existence. So I just couldn't understood what was the goal of your presentation. Although it was well work, I was very confused. What was the goal of this? Or I know that you are directing something. You mentioned in the last comment or 2 comments ago that you were trying to convey this information to your mother and people that are not really connected. And that's fantastic. But how we are gonna actually bring in the knowledge of others, and those others are the ones that are actually fighting for Earth in a daily basis. If we go here to the people in New Mexico, they are trying to fight, with the exploitation of the land by the government of the United States. If we go to Chile, we are find also the natives. They are trying to fight the government of Chile to try to destroy the natural resources and the sanctuaries for animals to be alive, just because for the excess of the human use of the land. And in Mexico, you name it, we have
Sure.
we have the Canada going and take silver and all these natural resources from the Huichol land in the
Sure.
desert of San Luis Potosí.
Sure.
So I was very confused.
Okay. Can I jump in, Chawa?
Sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for your. It's very, very valuable comments, and let me try to say a couple of things. The first is the we, like I repeated a couple of times. We is the industrialized human. So I would never do a presentation like this to indigenous people, because we can go in a long conversation about that, but just the short version is that this doesn't apply to them. I'm not indigenous in the sense of the political definition of the term. I try to be indigenous in the sense of being of a place. I am a mestizo, and probably you saw that then in the potential integration there that I was trying to highlight. And so this particular presentation was trying to do is to demonstrate by the work, the field work that I've been doing in my own work, that a deep structure of transformation can be understood by way of integration of the spiral of Joanna and the basic perinatal matrices of Stan Grof. That doesn't suffocate the voices of the other, not at all, at least in my mind. It's actually a deep structure of transformation that allows them to try to make sense of what the industrialized mind needs to go about and do. And so that's kind of like the short version of that. And hopefully that clarifies things a little bit for you, Chawa.
Thanks.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Adrián. I think we've come to the end of our time, so we'll end our question and answer at this point. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I've also put a link in so to encourage people to leave their feedback in the hiring process. But thank you very much, everybody.